There's a kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't touch, a heaviness that lingers beneath the skin, behind the eyes, inside the soul. And if you're an empath, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not just about being physically worn out. It's something deeper, quieter, and far more dangerous. It's waking up after 8 hours and still feeling like the weight of the world is sitting on your chest. It's the invisible fatigue of carrying too much, not because you wanted to, but because you felt like you had to. You absorb pain like a sponge. You take in disappointment, sadness, tension, frustration, and somewhere along the way you started believing that was your role. That you were strong enough to handle it all, even when no one asked how you were doing. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. You're not just tired, you're being drained, on purpose. You think it's coincidence that you always feel worse after talking to certain people? That some spaces leave you feeling dizzy, confused, even sick? It's not a bad mood. It's energy theft. And the worst part? The ones draining you often do it smiling. They come wrapped in love, in friendship, in shared bloodlines. But behind the words, behind the hugs, behind the subtle guilt, is a hunger for your light. Because your presence calms storms, your energy mends wounds, and they know it. Even if you don't. Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And maybe that's the real danger of being an empath. You accept others completely, but rarely yourself. You give, and you give until one day you collapse, and no one notices because they never saw you as someone who could break. But that exhaustion you're carrying? It's not just yours, it's borrowed, inhaled, forced. And the longer you pretend it's normal, the closer you get to losing the very thing that makes you, you. Your empathy is not the problem. Their addiction to it is. To be an empath is to feel the world twice, once for yourself and once for everyone else. It's sensing someone's sadness before they speak. It's walking into a room and knowing immediately who's hurting. It's crying without knowing why, only to realize later it wasn't your grief you were carrying. You were holding someone else's shadow. Empaths don't just notice pain, they swallow it. And in a world that runs on noise and numbness, that sensitivity can feel like a curse. But Jung would argue otherwise. To him, the path to becoming whole, what he called individuation, required us to embrace the parts of ourselves that make us different, even if they make us suffer. Especially if they make us suffer. Your ability to feel so deeply isn't a flaw. It's a mirror. It reflects what others have buried. That's why they're drawn to you. That's why they cling. You make them feel seen, alive, less hollow. But here's the paradox. The same gift that connects you to others is the one that isolates you. Because most people don't know how to receive without taking. They don't know how to be healed without draining the healer. And so you become a magnet for brokenness. A light in the dark that everyone runs to until you start burning out. And when you do, they say you've changed. That you're colder now, less available. But what they really mean is, you stopped letting me feed off your warmth. There's a reason many empaths are exhausted, anxious, chronically ill. The body keeps score when the soul carries too much. You weren't meant to be a container for everyone else's chaos. You were meant to transmute it, not absorb it. But to do that, you must first recognize the difference between connection and consumption, between empathy and enmeshment. Because while your sensitivity is a sacred thing, it can become your undoing if you don't learn to guard it. Empaths don't need to be harder, they need to be wiser. To realize that feeling deeply is not the same as being responsible for everyone who hurts. Jung believed in embracing the whole self, and that includes your right to protect your peace. You don't owe your energy to anyone who confuses your heart with a power outlet. You are not here to be used. You are here to become whole. They don't wear cloaks. They don't hide in the shadows. They sit across from you at dinner. They text you when they need someone to talk to. They tell you you're their rock, their safe space, their only source of calm. And you believe them because you are kind, because your heart is wired to help. But there's something you haven't yet said out loud. You feel worse after they leave, emptier, confused. like someone pulled the plug on your soul while smiling straight into your eyes. These are the emotional vampires, and they rarely look like villains, friends, partners, family. They come with a smile but leave with your energy. They show up when they're in crisis, always a crisis. And you, naturally, open the door. You listen, comfort, carry. But notice the pattern. When you're the one unraveling, they vanish. When you need reciprocity, suddenly they're overwhelmed, busy, going through something. But when their world collapses, you're their first call. And each time, you give, hoping maybe this time it'll be different, that they'll stay once they're healed. But they don't, because they weren't connecting, they were feeding. These people don't always mean harm. That's what makes it worse. Some genuinely love you but only know how to love in survival mode, so they cling to your light like a life raft. But love without self-awareness is still damage. And empathy without boundaries is still destruction. What you're offering them, stability, presence, unconditional support, should have been earned. Instead, they demand it. And you give it, again and again, until one day you realize you're more tired after being with them than you were before. And still, you wonder if it's your fault. It's not. They never took from you violently. They didn't need to. They knew your door was always open. That's what emotional vampires do best. They don't storm the castle, they charm the gatekeeper. But just because someone is broken doesn't mean you're required to bleed for them. At some point, you have to ask, are they reaching out for healing, or are they just hungry for your light? Not everyone in your life is a blessing. Some are a lesson in what happens when you give without limit. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a shadow, the parts of ourselves we suppress, deny, or disown. Rage, insecurity, envy, fear. And most people spend their entire lives pretending those pieces don't exist. But here's the problem. What we repress doesn't disappear. It hides, it festers, and eventually, it seeks expression. Often through projection, often through others. And that's where you come in. When someone hasn't faced their own shadow, they unconsciously look for someone to carry it for them. Empaths become that someone, because your openness is an invitation. Your softness feels safe, and their unconscious sees that safety as a dumping ground. Without realizing it, they begin to project their unhealed parts onto you. You become their emotional landfill. Their pain becomes your weight. Their wounds become your responsibility. And you keep showing up, thinking it's compassion. But what it really is misalignment. Jung called it the process of transference, when unresolved inner conflict is unconsciously handed to someone else. And the empath, ever attuned, ever available, becomes the favorite target. They don't say it outright, but the energy is loud. Here, hold my shame, carry my fear, absorb what I refuse to face. And because your soul is wired for healing, you do. Not realizing that you're not healing them, you're housing them. You become the container for what they will never claim as their own. And here's the most painful part. They don't even know they're doing it. That's why it's so confusing. They say they love you. They probably do. But it's a love tangled in shadow. They don't want your freedom, they want your function. Not your presence, but your permission to let them stay broken. Jung warned that the shadow, when unexamined, runs the personality. And it will always seek balance, even if that balance is parasitic. You are not their therapist. You are not their redeemer. And your body is not built to be their emotional detox. The moment you recognize that, everything changes. Their darkness is not your burden to carry. You can hold space without holding responsibility. You can love without being consumed. The shadow will always look for light. But you are not obligated to be the flame for someone else's refusal to see. It doesn't come with shouting. It doesn't arrive with fists. It shows up as a sigh, a pause. A look that says, after everything I've done for you, it's the guilt that coats the air so quiet you don't even question it. That's how it begins. The manipulation you don't notice. The subtle kind. The kind that dresses itself as love, concern, or just being honest. But every word, every gesture carries an invisible price, and the currency they're collecting is you. They vent constantly. long monologues filled with complaints, fears, regrets. And you listen, always. You're the safe space. But watch how the roles are never reversed. Your silence is their spotlight, your shoulder is their sanctuary, but when the storm brews in your own life, they disappear, or worse, they turn it back on you. You're being dramatic, you're too sensitive. Suddenly, you're the problem. And yet, you stay. Why? Because you've been conditioned to see this as normal, as love, as what it means to be there for someone. But here's the unspoken truth. Their peace has been bought with your turmoil. Every time you say yes when you meant no. Every time you listen when your soul is screaming for quiet. Every time you carry their burden, even when yours is breaking you. That's not love, that's emotional currency, and you've been overpaying. They shift the weight so skillfully you don't realize it's not yours until you're already sinking, and then they offer you just enough warmth to make you doubt your instincts. A compliment here, a hug there, a sudden, unexpected thank you. It feels good, it gives you hope, but it's a cycle, not a connection, a pattern you've been taught to call devotion. But manipulation isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, and the whisper sounds like, "You're the only one who understands me." It sounds like praise, but it's a chain, because what it really means is, don't leave, don't stop, don't start choosing yourself. And you won't notice until your own reflection starts fading, until your joy shrinks, your spirit dulls, your voice softens. That's the cost. But the warning signs were always there. You were just too loyal, too kind, too hopeful to name them. It starts with a phrase that sounds innocent. "I don't know what I'd do without you." And maybe the first time it even feels beautiful, needed, loved. But then it turns, slowly, quietly. The words change shape. They begin to sound like, "If you leave, I'll fall apart." And now what you thought was affection starts to taste like fear. Not yours, theirs. And you're expected to carry it. This is how emotional blackmail disguises itself as love, wrapped in intimacy, laced with guilt. They don't beg you to stay, they make you feel like leaving would break something sacred. That walking away would be cruel, that choosing yourself would make you the villain. And so, you stay. Not because you're fulfilled, but because you're afraid of what might happen if you don't. And that's the trap. You've confused responsibility for connection. You've mistaken their dependence for love. But real love doesn't hold you hostage. It doesn't bind you with threats wrapped in trembling voices. "I need you" becomes a cage when it's spoken by someone who refuses to stand on their own. "No one else understands me" becomes a leash, a noose, a weight you were never meant to carry. Carl Jung warned that what we fail to make conscious will control us. And this manipulation is unconscious for many, but not for all. Some know exactly what they're doing. They know your heart, your empathy, your longing to help. So they cry in just the right way. They touch your hand at the perfect moment. They weaponize tenderness, not out of malice, but out of fear. Still, the result is the same. You remain stuck. You think leaving would make you selfish. You think staying makes you loyal. But here's what no one told you. It's not your job to be someone's emotional anchor while they refuse to swim. You are not a life jacket. You are not a lifeline. You are a person, and your peace is not a sacrifice. It is a right. Emotional blackmail is not always loud. It wears the face of love. But real love lets you go when you're drowning. It doesn't pull you deeper and call it closeness. The guilt you feel? That's not proof of love. It's a signal that you're being held, not hugged. It didn't start yesterday. This pattern, this instinct to carry, to fix, to soothe, was born long before you understood what boundaries were. Maybe it started in a house where love had conditions, where peace depended on your behavior, where you learned to scan a room before you spoke, measuring the emotional temperature like a human thermostat. You became the peacemaker, the caretaker, the one who held it together when no one else would. And the truth is, you got really good at it. But here's what no one told you: that role wasn't yours to play. You were a child. You weren't supposed to absorb everyone else's chaos. You weren't supposed to earn love by sacrificing yourself, but you did. And it became a reflex, one you never questioned until now. Carl Jung said that we all project the parts of ourselves we cannot face. But empaths, we do the opposite. We internalize. They project, you absorb, they hand you their grief, and you cradle it like it was born inside you. They offload their fears, and you wear them like armor. You don't just feel their pain, you believe it's your responsibility to fix it. But it never was. You say yes because saying no feels like betrayal. You hold space even when you have none left. You confuse love with labor, and in doing so, you disappear a little more each day. The saddest part? Most of them don't even notice. They think you're fine. They always do, because you've never let them see otherwise. But the weight you carry didn't arrive overnight. It's ancestral, generational. Emotional DNA passed down and unexamined. You were taught directly or silently that love means sacrifice. That your needs come last. That if someone is hurting, your job is to make it better. But here's the truth. Feeling responsible for everyone else's emotions is not empathy, it's a trauma response. You don't owe anyone your constant rescuing. You are not the glue for broken people. You are not the fixer of inherited dysfunction. And you are allowed finally to put it down. You've held it long enough. I can fix them. The most dangerous sentence a wounded empath will ever whisper. It sounds noble, heroic, like love in its purest form. But really, it's a trap dressed as a mission. Because fixing someone who refuses to heal themselves isn't compassion, it's self-abandonment. And it's one of the most common myths empaths live and die by. You meet someone lost, and your heart lights up. You see past the dysfunction. You spot the little boy, the broken girl, the unmet need behind their anger or numbness. You think, if I love them the right way, they'll change. But they don't, not because they're incapable, but because they don't want to. Not yet, maybe not ever. So what happens next? You give more. You pour and pour, hoping your love will reach the places they refuse to visit. You wait. You make excuses. You explain their behavior to your friends. You start minimizing your needs, suppressing your voice, twisting yourself into whatever shape they require, and still they stay the same. Meanwhile, you're fading. The cost of trying to save someone is always yourself, piece by piece, until one day you realize you haven't healed them, you've only delayed your own healing. Because here's the painful truth. Healing others became the distraction from facing your own wounds. You used their brokenness as a reason to ignore your own, and it worked until it didn't. Carl Jung believed that real healing begins with integration, not projection, not fixing. It's turning inward, not outward. And for empaths, that's the hardest shift. Because looking inside means facing the truth, that you've been choosing people based on your potential to rescue them, not on their capacity to meet you. That loving them was easier than learning to love yourself. But saving someone doesn't make you whole. In fact, it often leaves you more shattered than when you began. Because love cannot replace self-worth, and rescuing someone is not the same as being in relationship with them. You are not their redemption arc. You are not the rehab center for people who refuse to check themselves in. You are allowed to stop trying. You are allowed to step away. Healing is not your responsibility, especially when it costs you your own. It doesn't happen overnight. There's no dramatic crash, no visible explosion, just a quiet unraveling. You wake up one day and realize the light inside you has dimmed. You no longer recognize your own reflection, not because your face has changed, but because your spirit has. The joy is missing, the spark, the sense of self, and still you smile. You show up. You hold space, but inside, something is slipping. This is the collapse of the empath, and it's almost always silent. It starts with burnout, but not just the kind that rest fixes. It's soul fatigue, chronic giving with no return. It's anxiety that doesn't stem from danger, but from being needed too much for too long. It's emotional numbness that creeps in because your nervous system can't handle one more sad story, One more, "Can I just talk to you for a minute?" One more weight dropped on your chest. You begin to withdraw, not out of selfishness, but because you have nothing left. Your laughter becomes rare. Your body aches for reasons doctors can't explain. You start forgetting things, zoning out, feeling disconnected from others, from the world, from yourself. People will say you've changed, that you're distant, but they didn't see how long you were bleeding underneath the surface. They didn't notice all the small deaths you died for them, the emotional labor, the unspoken sacrifices, the smiles that covered your crumbling. Because the collapse isn't sudden, it's been building with every yes you couldn't say no to, every time you betrayed your own needs to avoid disappointing someone else, every time you silenced your voice so theirs could be louder. This is what it leads to, the slow erosion of self. And perhaps the cruelest part? Even in your collapse, you feel guilty. Guilty for pulling away, for needing space, for not being who they expect anymore. But here's what no one tells you. That guilt is a sign you're waking up, a sign you're beginning to choose yourself. And that's not weakness, that's survival. There's a moment, quiet, steady, undeniable, when your soul whispers a single word. Enough. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in truth, in clarity, in power. And when that moment comes, something inside you realigns. Because saying enough is not cruelty, it's not rejection, it's not abandonment. It's remembering that your energy is sacred, that your time, your peace, your joy were never meant to be endlessly harvested by people who refuse to grow their own. You don't need to scream, you don't need to explain, you don't even need to make them understand. Because the power of saying enough doesn't live in volume, it lives in conviction. It's the quiet act of walking away without dragging your soul behind you. They'll call it selfish. They'll say, "You've changed." And they're right, you have. You've gone from being the one who fixes, saves, and softens every blow to the one who chooses peace. You've gone from being the emotional crutch to becoming your own foundation. That's not betrayal. That's self-respect. Carl Jung believed that boundaries weren't walls, but thresholds, markers of where you end and another begins. And for the empath, boundaries are not just important, they are essential. Without them, you dissolve. You become the sponge, the storage, the support beam. But with them, you become whole. To walk away doesn't mean you didn't love. It means you loved deeply and finally included yourself. Saying enough doesn't erase your compassion. It defines it. It proves that your love has limits, that your well has a bottom, and that anyone who demands otherwise was never seeing you, only using you. This is the art, to leave with love but without regret, to close the door gently but firmly, to protect your energy not out of spite but out of wisdom, because peace is not passive, it's chosen, it's defended. And once you taste it, you will never again trade it for connection that costs your soul. Enough is not a breaking point, it's a beginning. They told you being alone was failure. That solitude meant something was wrong with you, that if you weren't surrounded by people, you were somehow incomplete, but they were wrong. Alone doesn't mean lonely. Sometimes it means finally being able to hear your own voice after years of everyone else speaking over it. There is a difference between isolation and intention. Isolation numbs, intention heals. And when an empath finally chooses solitude not because they're broken, but because they're done being drained, something sacred begins to unfold. You stop leaking energy into places that never filled you. You stop giving just to be seen. You start remembering, reassembling, returning to yourself. Solitude isn't absence, it's presence. The deepest kind, the kind that doesn't need permission. It's not a punishment, it's a sanctuary. Jung called it the withdrawal to the self, the moment when a person, tired of performing, turns inward to realign. And for the empath, this is not weakness, it's rebirth. Because when you step away from the noise, from the takers, from the ones who praised your giving but never asked how much it cost, you begin to see clearly. You begin to feel again, not their feelings, but yours. And those emotions, long buried under the weight of everyone else's chaos, begin to rise like truth breaking through silence. You don't need constant company. You need sacred connection. And sometimes that begins with your own soul, with walking into a quiet room and realizing that nothing is missing, that your peace, your presence was always enough. They will say you're cold now, that you're distant, that you've changed. Let them talk. They don't know what it means to preserve energy as sacred. They only knew you when you were leaking, not when you were whole. Solitude isn't selfish, it's salvation. Your body always knows before your mind catches up. You feel it, a sudden heaviness after a conversation, a fog that settles behind your eyes, the quiet exhaustion that arrives when they walk into the room. You tell yourself it's nothing, you're just tired, but deep down you know something about them is draining you. These are the energy parasites, and they don't always mean harm, but their impact is real. They talk endlessly but never listen. They offload their pain but never ask about yours. You leave their presence feeling scattered, disoriented, or even sick, and yet you second-guess it. Why? Because they smile, because they mean well, because they never say anything overtly cruel. But that's the trick. Energy parasites don't need to insult you to consume you. They do it by always needing you, by turning every interaction into an emotional transaction. They come for advice they never use, for comfort they never reciprocate, for attention they haven't earned, and every time you feel smaller, duller, emptier. Carl Jung taught that we must listen to the unconscious, but empaths, we often ignore our own. We override the signals, the gut feelings, the tension in our chest, the way our skin pulls tight when we know someone's presence isn't right for us. Instead, we rationalize. They're just going through something. I'm probably overreacting. But here's the truth. Your body doesn't lie. The headaches, the fatigue, the anxiety that seems to have no source, these are signs, not symptoms. Your intuition isn't being dramatic, it's being accurate. Pay attention to the people after whom you always need to rest. The ones who shift the mood of a room just by entering it. The ones who always leave you second-guessing yourself. That's not coincidence. That's your energy warning you. You don't need proof. You need permission to trust yourself again. To believe your body when it says no. To walk away even when they don't understand why. You don't owe them an explanation. You owe yourself peace. Not everyone who smiles at you is safe. Some people feed off the light they refuse to create in themselves. And the more you heal, the clearer they become. You don't need to fight them. Just stop offering your light to those who live in chosen darkness. There is a moment in every empath's life when survival is no longer enough. When being everything for everyone begins to cost more than it's worth. When exhaustion turns into awakening. And in that moment, something ancient stirs inside you, not a desire to escape, but a need to return. Not to the past, not to people, but to yourself. This is the return to wholeness. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, by reclaiming the pieces you abandoned to survive. The part of you that said no but was silenced. The part of you that needed rest but kept giving. The part of you that once dreamed freely before responsibility dimmed the light. Becoming whole is not about perfection, it's about integration. It's about saying, I will no longer split myself to be digestible for others. You don't owe your energy to anyone who demands it. You don't owe your light to people who only show up when they need warmth. You don't have to be less just so others feel more. The world taught you that shining made you dangerous, that your intuition made you dramatic, that your boundaries made you cold, but the world was wrong. Your light is not meant to be sacrificed, it's meant to be sustained, and wholeness begins the moment you stop apologizing for it. The moment you say, I will no longer bleed for those who call it love. You were never meant to be everyone's emotional crutch. You were meant to walk on your own 2 feet, with your spirit intact, your soul undivided. Wholeness doesn't arrive with noise or applause. It arrives quietly when you start honoring your no with the same love you gave your yes. When you stop waiting for someone else to see your worth and begin living like you already know it. That is not selfish. that is sacred. You are not here to be broken down into pieces. You are here to become whole and stay that way. You didn't just love them, you mirrored them. You reflected their wounds, their dreams, their buried truths. They looked into your eyes and saw the parts of themselves they had long forgotten or never dared to face. And for a while they mistook your reflection for salvation. But while you were a mirror, they wore masks, pretending to be whole while feeding off your soul, pretending to be close while hiding behind their walls. And still, you showed up, raw, real, open. You gave them soul. You gave them the most sacred parts of you, not because you didn't know better, but because you hoped they would rise to meet you there. They didn't, because some people don't want healing, they want to stay hidden. And your light was too revealing, your honesty too sharp, your presence too demanding, not because you asked for anything, but because you made authenticity the only option, and that scared them. You spent so long reflecting others that you forgot what your own truth looked like. You became what they needed, even when it meant disappearing. But now, it's time to turn the mirror inward, to become the reflection of your own soul, to stop giving your light away and start bathing in it. To remember, your energy was never meant to be currency for someone else's comfort. They wore masks. You gave them soul. Now give that soul back to yourself. Let them keep their illusion. You're done shrinking to fit it. You're done being the backdrop to someone else's performance. You were never the support role. You are the main story. And the plot twist? You don't need anyone else's approval to reclaim your power. You don't need to break their mask. Just remove your mirror. They'll be left staring at nothing, and that's exactly what they gave you. The path forward isn't vengeance. It's visibility. It's living so fully in your truth that no one ever dares to dim it again. There comes a point when empathy, unchecked, becomes erosion, a slow dissolving of your spirit, masked as kindness. You think you're being loving, selfless, supportive. But what you're really doing is fading a little more with every time you put someone else's peace above your own. And the hardest truth to face? That the people draining you know exactly what they're doing. They're not always malicious. Some are broken, some are afraid. Some have never known how to survive without feeding off the nearest open heart. But intention doesn't erase impact. Just because they didn't mean to bleed you dry doesn't mean you weren't left empty. And Carl Jung would warn you in his quiet, knowing way that looking outward for your identity will only lead to a dream, a distortion, a life lived in fragments. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens. And you've been looking at them for too long, studying their moods, tracking their needs, absorbing their pain, waiting for them to change, to see you, to finally give back what you've been giving without end. But that awakening? It doesn't come from them. It never did. It begins the moment you turn your gaze inward and ask yourself, what would my life look like if I stopped leaking? This is your final warning, not from fear, not from anger, but from truth, the kind of truth that rises when you're too tired to pretend anymore. Empathy without boundaries is not love, it's self-destruction. They're draining you, not by accident, but by design. Because you made it easy, because you never said no, because your light was always on, even when they stopped knocking. But the question is no longer about them. The question is, will you finally choose yourself? Will you choose stillness over survival, wholeness over sacrifice? Will you choose to protect the one thing they were never meant to have full access to your soul? This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming conscious, awake, aware. This is about remembering that love, real love, never requires your disappearance. So take your light back, close the door gently, but firmly. Look inward. And this time, stay there. This story was intense. But this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.